Hello everyone, back to today's second video. We're going to have a look at the weather next week to 10 days in today's second video, and all eyes are on the Scandinavian high next week to see what it's going to do. Will it pull cold air from the east into British Isles? I think it will to some degree. I've also perhaps backed off a little bit this morning from that idea. They might upgrade things again later. As I said, was it yesterday's video when I said about let battle commence, really is a battle that's going on next week between the high pressure on the one hand, the low pressure of the Atlantic on the other, and it's a very, very subtle differences, or very subtle differences can make a big difference to the overall weather pattern. But I think we will get some easterly influences next week at the very least. I'm going to show you the latest in a second. But before I get on with all of that, just to say about the ads that Gaz of is, I think articles on the pages, if you have a browse, just click through the links, you're going to help us page website. Thanks very much for doing that. JMA Friday was released earlier, and you can find that video here on the homepage. Just scroll down a bit, and it's underneath the link ads. It's going to be a fairly coldish month ahead, actually, if the Japanese and CFSV2 models have got it right. They do look pretty chilly through particularly weeks 2 and weeks 3. But if you want to know more about that, do check out JMA Friday here on the homepage. So we'll start off just looking at the latest with the stratosphere. So this is the temperature at 10 HPA over the North Pole in the stratosphere. We have the stratospheric warming, of course, at 10 HPA, but occurred back towards the start of the week and into the weekend. It's dropped down a little bit. I was expecting it to tick up again. I knew we would get a bit of a drop down from that peak that occurred just there, but I was expecting it to lift up again. It might lift up again actually in the next day or so, but at the moment we haven't gone back to where we was at the start of the week and into last weekend, when we had the main part of the stratospheric warming at 10 HPA. As I said yesterday, I think we just reached the threshold of an actual sudden stratospheric warming, but it was very, very much touch and go whether we did that or not. Now, at 30 HPA, we have seen quite a big response. Look at that. The black line has really gone up there at 30 HPA, and it's almost reaching the top of the scale, which is 30 HPA minus 30. So that looks more significant actually at 30 HPA than what occurred at 10 HPA, perhaps a little bit surprisingly. So it's definitely, that warmth that occurred at 10 HPA is definitely propagated down to a lower level, and we're just going to wait and see now whether we move this down into the troposphere, and if we do, whether we set up blocking. If we set up blocking, where that blocking happens to be. So there's always a lot of ifs and buts about this. But warming did occur at 10 HPA. It went down very significantly to 30 HPA. It has gone down very significantly to 30 HPA, and we wait and see where things go next. This is the temperature forecast from the GFS model for 10 HPA over the North Pole. So this is from the GFS run on the website meteosil.fr. You can see the bright colours here over the top of the pole is the stratospheric warming that is still going on, although it's at a lower level compared to the peak that occurred a few days ago. It's still happening, this stratospheric warming. Temperatures are still way above average at 10 HPA. And actually, we lift those temperatures up a little bit more. There they come again with another burst through the course of tomorrow and into Sunday, again pushing those red colours in towards the top of the pole. As I say, the temperature might go up again at 10 HPA over the weekend. Now, into next week, we start to lose those warm temperatures and we begin to get the blue colours coming back. Don't be too worried about that. You can't sustain the temperature, that sort of level in the stratosphere, all that long. So you'd expect the colder temperatures to begin to return, and that's very much is happening. By this point, as we're going through to the middle part of February, by this point, when again, of course, it is turning cold at 10 HPA, though not exceptionally so, but temperatures are lowering into the middle part of February at 10 HPA over pole. And by that point, we've got to look and see what's happening in the troposphere. That will be where we have to focus on next to see whether there's any tropospheric response to this stratospheric warming that has occurred right now. So the Arctic Oscillation is going negative, it's forecast to go negative anyway over the next week or two, up towards the middle part of February. This is mid-February just here. This is the Arctic Oscillation observed and forecast chart. So the black line here tells us where the Arctic Oscillation has been, and the red lines at the end where the GFS ensembles forecasting the Arctic Oscillation to go. So this is an index that's just reflecting the state of the atmosphere. It isn't driving anything, it's just telling you what the atmosphere is doing. And right now, the Arctic Oscillation is still positive. Up here with the black line is where we are right now. So this tells us that we've still got quite a lot of low pressure up over North Pole. We're still bringing in westerlies through particularly the Atlantic and Europe. Now, the forecast takes the Arctic Oscillation down into really significantly negative territory. There we go, a bit of a plunge taking place. That might be a response to the stratospheric warming. You never totally say that one thing follows another. So, as I say, we know that our stratospheric warming, we tend to get an increase of high pressure over North Pole, and it tends to coincide with cold air being pushed out into the mid-latitudes. But you can never absolutely definitively say that what you're seeing just there is a response to what has happened in the stratosphere. But anyway, the Arctic Oscillation is trending negative as we're moving into the middle part of February, telling us that high pressure is going to be developing in the northern latitudes if the forecast is right, and we'll have to wait and see who gets the cold from that. The North Atlantic Oscillation, though, is still a problem. So this is, again, North Atlantic Oscillation observed and forecast chart. The black line here, again, tells us where the North Atlantic Oscillation has been. The red lines where the North Atlantic Oscillation is being forecast to go by the GFS ensembles. And the forecast is to keep the North Atlantic Oscillation positive. So we're starting positive right now. That's where we are at the moment. And there's no real deviation from that going through to the middle part of February. So this tells us that although the Arctic Oscillation is going negative, although we're getting blocking in the Arctic, we are not yet seeing any real definitive sign of a response from the Atlantic. And this is going to be a problem. If we're going to get high pressure to the north or to the northeast, so say across Scandinavia or Greenland, or to the north, generally, of the country. You're going to get high pressure there to be able to tap into the cold air, but it's going to try and push out of the polar region. We need to see the Atlantic, at the very least, easing away and calming down. It's in quite a buoyant state at the moment. And whilst the North Atlantic Oscillation is staying positive like this, it's telling us that the Atlantic is probably going to stay fairly active and fairly buoyant, which might act as a stopper, a buffer, from getting that cold air in from the east or from the north. So yes, we have got signs of blocking appearing over the pole, but the other side of it is what's happening in the Atlantic, and that isn't looking all that great, to be honest. And this explains the uncertainty, I think, within the model output. The high pressure is going to get going across Scandinavia next week, no doubt about that, but quite how much influence it can have with the Atlantic looking quite buoyant and the Azores high looking fairly strong. That's what's causing the uncertainty. So these are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles. The red line here is the 30-year temperature average. For the weekend inside of next week, around average. So that is all quite straightforward. Again, it's really from the second half of next week, which is sort of this period here, that we've got all of the uncertainty. Certainly going to be colder than average later next week. I think we will get an initial push of easterly winds on Thursday and Friday next week. There'll be cold winds, and they might well be enough to produce snow showers on the east coast. But then whether they would be sustained and whether it would turn into a prolonged or even severe cold spell, that is the uncertainty. You see that from the GFS ensembles. The idea is still to really be keeping those temperatures very, very close to the 30-year temperature average. Now, there are several members of the GFS ensembles that are very cold, actually going for quite severe cold weather. So, as I say, there is the potential to turn things very cold and sustain that cold for quite a prolonged period. But because the Atlantic is so buoyant, because the Azores high is quite strong, and that low pressure around Iceland is fairly strong as well, and thus the westerlies are enhanced. Because of that, it just isn't entirely straightforward whether we can sustain this high pressure over Scandinavia for a very prolonged period. There are many, many cold spells that have happened over the past, or potential cold spells that happened over the past, that the Azores high has put the mockers on and ruined. This might be one of those. But again, because there's so many cold outliers, in fact, there's so many of them that you can't really call them cold outliers. Let's say there's a cluster, because there's a cluster of really quite cold ensemble members. There is the potential here to produce something quite noteworthy and memorable going into the middle part of February. So I'm not ruling anything out, but I'm not ruling anything in either, essentially. Temperature anomalies looking like this for the next week. This is going from the 3rd through to the 11th of February. Bit colder than average for the UK, so going a bit below average. The core of the cold through the next week is still over towards the northeast of Europe, or going into the western part of Russia, essentially. We'll see how much of this cold can be pushed out from Russia during the next few days. The precipitation anomaly looks a bit drier than average, generally in the north and west of Europe, particularly so for Scandinavia. So this is how things are looking on Monday from the GFS, and we've got high pressure in over Scandinavia at 1,040 millibars, and that is a proper high pressure, by the way. It's not something that sort of built up of the Azores high and just ended up over Scandinavia. This is a real Scandinavian high, extending probably from a Siberian high further to the north. So this is the real deal, and if we could get into an easterly, I think eventually we will pull in some really bitterly cold air with this high pressure, because it is a genuine Scandinavian blocking type feature. So it's in there across Scandinavia on Monday. There's the easterly wind coming out of Russia into Scandinavia. We at this point remain in the Atlantic influence, with this area of low pressure out to the west of us. We go through to Tuesday, probably bring quite a heavy band of rain across the country. That's going to struggle to clear the country with this high pressure that's up over Scandinavia. Then through to Wednesday, and we're desperately trying to get those winds into the east, but look how buoyant things still are in the Atlantic. Still lots of blues and purples there to the south of Greenland. That's really quite an active Atlantic, and we've still got the Azores high as well down here off the coast of Spain and Portugal. So this Atlantic seal definitely isn't helping us get into the easterly wind. We move through to Thursday, and this is when we were supposed to be pulling in those easy winds. This particular run of the GFS wants to actually have winds from the south on Thursday. I wouldn't be overly worried about that. I suspect Thursday will be the day we start to pull some colder air in from the east. By Friday, even this run of the GFS is pulling in those easterly winds. There might be some sort of snow event with that Thursday, Friday, as that weather system comes up against a high pressure and stalls and then gets pushed back to the west again. There could be snow with that Thursday and Friday. So we end the week next week, this time next week, essentially pulling in this cold easterly wind. And then into the weekend, things are looking rather flabby, really. So there is a bit of an easterly influence there on Saturday, but it's a fairly sort of weak one. And by Sunday and Monday, we're actually re-establishing the Atlantic, so that high pressure is broken down. I'm not sure about that at all. It's a very, very quick breakdown of the high pressure. But again, you see what the problem is. It's that the polar vortex and the cold temperatures up here around Greenland and Iceland are still there. Still the Azores high, albeit pulling it back a little bit into the central Atlantic, but still the Azores high. So these westerlies are still fairly strong, still trying to get in, and that breaks down the high pressure across Scandinavia really quick. But that does look a very, very quick breakdown of that high pressure, and as I say, I'm not sure at all that the model has that right. ECMWF for Monday has a high pressure over Scandinavia, desperately trying to get those winds into the east. We've got a weather front across the country on Tuesday, but it's being blocked by that high pressure up over Scandinavia. So that, again, probably going to be wet to start next week with some heavy outbreaks of rain likely. That front slides away to the southeast on Wednesday, and we begin to pull colder air in from the east. Thursday, pushing another low pressure in from off the Atlantic. That one's grinding to a halt again. So again, there's probably a weather front somewhere around here. Now we're almost certainly starting to pull in cold air to the eastern side of the country. So again, wouldn't totally rule out the risk of some sort of snow event Thursday and Friday next week. And then finally, by Saturday, the easterly wind does get in, and it's a very slack easterly, however. It's not a classic sort of easterly by any means. And then the same idea Sunday and Monday, Monday being day 10, 13th of February, the high pressure is collapsing and allowing these southwesterly winds to start pushing back in the milder air from off the Atlantic. And then finally, the GEM, high pressure across Scandinavia on Monday. The low pressure is in the Atlantic, so a battle early next week, but probably produces a lot of heavy rain. Through to the middle part of next week, those easterly winds are starting to push in, and unlike the other two, the GEM actually has those easterly winds establishing into the second half of next week. That was the original idea, that we would just push the cold air in from the east late next week, and the GEM is still going with that idea. This could be bringing snow showers into the south and the east, and we don't get a collapse of the high pressure. So out to day 10, which is Monday 13th of February, that high pressure is still there across Scandinavia. We're still pulling in cold air from the east. So the GEM is definitely the coldest of the output this morning in terms of being quite a prolonged cold spell. But the other two, they want to break it fairly quickly. So I think just got to wait and see. I think the GFS and the ECMF are probably lowering pressure too quickly across Scandinavia, even with the Atlantic being quite buoyant. I think the high pressure will be more stubborn than those models are suggesting. So I would suspect we get the easterly coming in later next week. It might be associated with a snow event if we have a weather front coming to a standstill across the country Thursday and into Friday. Then that gets pushed back to west, and we pull in an easterly wind for next weekend, so the second weekend of February. And then quite where we go after that, is it just a day or two of cold weather and then we return back to the Atlantic, or is it something that we could develop into quite a prolonged cold spell? I think that is very much on a knife edge at the moment, and we'll need to see the Atlantic weakening quite significantly to be able to sustain this for a prolonged period. So very interesting anyway through next week. I think I've got some quite interesting weather coming up, and we'll of course be discussing that much more in the weekend forecast tomorrow, so come back for that. Then that's all for now, and thanks for watching.